This is the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast, Episode 66, Edge of Field Considerations, A Farmer's Perspective. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll hear a discussion I had with 3 farmers from the state of Illinois about the edge of field conservation practices they have put in place on some of their farms. I think it was an interesting discussion and might be one that landowners and farmers alike can take some notes on as they think about improvements to their own properties over time. As is customary for me, I asked the farmers gathered for this edge of field conservation discussion to tell me a little bit about themselves and their farms.
Yeah, my name's Brian Corkill. I live in southeastern Henry County in Illinois. Raise 900 acres corn and soybeans.
I'm Brent Fowler. I farm with my family in southern McDonough County, around 3,500 acres of corn and soybeans.
Jim Fulton, farm in Livingston County by Sonneman. I have 690 acres of corn and soybeans.
Let's talk a little bit about the edge of field practices that you all deploy on your farms. They are different. Can we start with you, please?
Yeah, so I have several different edge of field practices. I have some filter strips. Obviously got waterways, and probably the most recent one I've installed is a bioreactor.
My primary field of edge practice would be buffer strips. We have around 125 acres of prairie that we've put in for wildlife habitat on field edges. That's our main goal, is to take unprofitable acres out of production and create wildlife habitat in.
Well, my main structure is a constructed wetland. It's 4.5 acres.
Those who are interested in constructed wetlands and to learn a great deal more about that can turn back into the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy podcast and look for that title, and you'll find our conversation about this constructed wetland. Let's, though, start with the one area I think every farmer will be used to and probably have somewhere on their farm, a waterway. You say this is your edge of field practice. Tell me about that and what that really means.
Well, I guess in our case, a lot of our waterways, and while they may be within field, they always tend to end up at the edge of the field. But it's a way that, number one, we can control soil runoff, things like that. And again, it's usually in areas where we've had erosion issues, so maybe not the most profitable acres, and it helps out filter out nutrients and things like that and surface water runoff. So we've put a focus on that over the last several years and doing some of it on our own, and we've put in some waterways and redone some waterways through a conservation stewardship program, and we put in some CRP waterways as well.
And I would guess that 3,500 acres, surely you have waterways that you deal with.
Oh, sure we have lots of waterways, and in fact we're kind of maybe going we're probably going a little stronger on waterways than we thought we would have 10 years ago. We've actually had a little bit of trouble with some of our interior dry dams not really holding up very well on really heavy rain events, so we've kind of gotten away from interior terraces and gone to a little more waterways. And one thing that we kind of do on our farm in particular is we kind of do what we kind of call temporary waterways, where we in our bean stubble fields where we've had tend to have more erosion than our cornstalk field, we will go in and put a little temporary strip of triticale in some of the really highly erodible areas, and then that's just a temporary waterway that will then burn down with the rest of the field and no-till our corn into. And we've kind of found that maybe these little temporary waterways are a little handier and a lot cheaper than interior dams with riser pipes in front.
So I will say, and maybe you can talk about the equipment you use as well, because most farmers will say, waterways, they're fine, but they're a pain in the tuchus in the middle of my field. You've got pretty large equipment that you're running across these fields. Has technology helped you out with that, or do you just live with the annoyance?
I think technology definitely plays a part into us leaning towards waterways. I think all of us been there. There's nothing worse than breaking through a field of corn at night and then stumbling onto a dry dam in the middle of the field. But with our waterways, we have automatic shutoffs with our planters, and we make interior boundaries that we can save from one year to the next. So when we come up to these waterways, we do it one time, and then in the future, every other time we plant that field, we just plant right through them, and the planter automatically shuts off. That's definitely been something that's been very helpful when it comes to waterways.
And on your farm, you have the planting custom farm. They're using a 24-row planter. Do they have to run through waterways on yours, and do they complain about it?
Well, actually, the man that plants my corn put my waterway in. He just rebuilt it last year. So he has the guidance system, and he has all that already in his system. And so same as with him. When he gets to it with a planter, it just turns off. And when he gets to it with a sprayer, it just turns off. And I don't think it's really an issue for him.
And these are effective tools, cost-effective tools, I think, also that your landowners sometimes don't mind, especially if they're in CRP.
Yeah, so we have CRP waterways mostly on ground that we own, but it can be, on farms that we rent. A lot of them at some point had some sort of waterways. Waterways were a lot popular back in the 70s, 80s. And then guys kind of, as they transitioned to no-till, kind of started taking waterways out because, I'm no-tilling. I don't need to have that waterway. But we found that we've been going back into those areas and putting waterways back in. So, and yeah, with the technology and everything, it really makes it pretty simple to work through those with things like on the sprayer, like exact apply. And as long as you have your interior boundaries and stuff like that, you can have a sprayer. You might be off, because your boom, you got a 120-foot boom, so you're 60 foot away from the waterway. If you're trying to boundary a waterway, and you might hang one or two nozzles out there and kill part of it. Well, now some of the newer technology, you don't have to worry about that, and it makes it a lot more efficient and save a lot in herbicide costs, save a lot in seed costs with the planter shutoffs and things like that too. So
I wanted to start with waterways because I thought it was probably one of those practices that producers, farmers, landowners will be familiar with, potentially easy enough for them to implement, a way to be involved with the CRP, and NRCS would be involved in the process of helping to create these. Now let's talk about some of the other practices that you're using on the edge of the field. You use some interesting things on the edge of the field as it's related to bioreactors and how you manage the flow of tile out of the fields.
Yeah, so we put in our first bioreactor about 4 years ago. I serve on a committee for Illinois Farm Bureau, and that's where I started kind of learning about it. And at that point in time, we were up to renew a CSP contract on a farm, and so that was one of the practices that we chose to do. And it happened to be on a part of a field that we had grid tiled the year before, so we knew where all the tile was. Actually, it made it a lot simpler for the installation. So we break into the tile. It was a sub main. Broke into the tile. You dig a pit. You have tile comes in. The pit's lined with plastic. Tile comes in. There's a manifold to spread the water out through the width of the pit. Water flows through. It's filled with wood chips. The water flows through the wood chips. There's another manifold on the other end to pick the water back up, and then it goes into the tile. And this obviously on the edge of the field, so it goes into the neighbor's tile from that point. But then there's also they have a bypass that goes around it. So during the wet times of the year, you're not being bottled up on water flow by having all of it go through the bioreactor. It can bypass the excess flow around it, so you're not affecting on how your tile works. And there's also control structures. So right now our control structures have had to be set to a certain amount to satisfy CSP. And we're also pulling water samples on the inlet and the outlet side. But going forward, we'll be able to actually, if we want to, we'll be able to raise and lower the water level in the field with those control structures. So that's what I'm looking forward to when we can get to that point.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you were looking forward to that point where you'll be able to use that weir to keep more water, more moisture on the farm.
Correct. Yeah. So during the growing season, we can keep more water in the field, and then maybe even let water out ahead of harvest if we need to. Again, keep water in the field during the winter time, and then coming into spring, then we can let water out of the field, so we can try to keep as much of that available water in the field when we need it.
One last question. You like this enough that you're putting a second one in?
That's correct. We're putting in another one this fall, and not doing it through any government program. Went out and searched out, so we've gotten a couple of grants that are going to cover the cost of that. And I don't know that we're going to put in automatic water samplers on this one, but I think we are going to try to do some maybe manual water sampling during different periods of the year, just to measure the effectiveness of how it's working. So
let's turn to McDonough County, where you missed. This was an interesting story that you told to a conference in Galesburg, bobwhite quail. And you just decided, I want bobwhite quail back. Your dad, who you still farm with, was not all that ecstatic about your decision, I take it.
There's definitely been some pushback, but overall I'm pretty fortunate that he lets me try these different practices. We went through a period there, several years, that we really weren't hearing or seeing any bobwhite, and so it kind of started off by first reducing mowing, and then a few years later we put on our first prairie plot, and then we really started seeing the birds kind of recover. So I went back to Dad and kind of had to nudge him a little bit, but kind of got him talked into putting in another 100 acres, and it's really helped. And also from a financial standpoint, we're taking some of these areas along the edge of the field where they're very highly erodible areas or really poor soil, and not very handy to farm with large equipment. We can kind of straighten these fields up, maybe get rid of some of these little triangle patches out, and so we can kind of kill two birds with one stone. We can kind of increase our profitability a little bit and create some really good wildlife habitat at the same time.
Can you tell me about the economics of actually taking land out of production?
Okay, yeah, the economics. I have a couple of fields that just come to mind. Like we have one field that's an 1.5 acre triangle, surrounded by trees with no good driveway, and we could, that field obviously doesn't yield very well, and we could put in a $800 culvert to get into the field. So it's really, to me, that one is a no-brainer to put into CRP. Dad, he would still farm that 1.5 acre triangle with trees on the side with no driveway. Another field that comes to mind is it's a small field. It's got a great big huge ditch that runs right through the middle of it. It's also like 1.5 acres. And we could put a big dry dam or something on the in the middle to try to stop that erosion. But really it's cost prohibitive to do something with such a small patch on such a poor yielding small field.
Now let's talk about some of the things that you do on larger fields. I like the idea that you were discussing related to transitioning out of a fence row or a hedgerow and what that meant from the trees to the field. I know farmers will understand that the closer you get to that hedgerow, if it still remains, the tougher it is to get a yield out of a crop.
Yeah, sure. Farming right up next to really tall trees, whether it be a timber edge or what have you. I think all of us farmers know that corn and soybeans don't grow well right up next to really large trees. It's like 30 feet where the tree roots go out and suck all the moisture out. You also have some, damage from animals. But, so those areas, it really seems like a no-brainer at times to put in a small buffer. And you can create a little bit of habitat in the area, so make a softer transition from tall trees to row crops, might be what I try to do on our farms. We have tall trees, maybe have some shrubs, and then some prairie, and then row crops.
How big of a space is that?
It kind of depends on how good the soil is, how erodible that strip is, and what we need to do to kind of straighten up field edge. But on our CRP programs, the program is 30 to 120 feet you get to pick in a CRP, and it does not have to be a constant distance the whole way. In other words, if you need a 30-foot wide and you come to where the timber edge moves further away from the field, you go 120 feet, and you kind of straighten that field up. So you kind of look at how good the soil is, how erodible it is, and what you need to do to make farming more efficient.
What do you think you're getting out of that deal?
I mean, I'm not really sure I'm really getting a lot out of that, but we're not losing money on that strip of crop that's failing often. So, the rental payment on CRP, some of our other programs, we were getting up to around $250 an acre, which is obviously more than what I'd want to pay rent on some of these really poor yielding areas right up next to trees.
Now let's turn our attention to the big dog at the edge of the field. And by big dog, this just takes up a lot of space. What was it about this area that caused you to say, hey, I think I might want to put in a large piece of property here, improvement, which may not look like an improvement, frankly, that will help to absorb a lot of the nutrients that are running off out of the watershed for this particular field?
Well, I'm on the Vermilion Headwaters Steering Committee, and I was at a meeting, and the Wetland Initiative ladies came and did a presentation, and I'd always been interested in a pond-like structure, and our family's always been interested in conservation and wildlife habitat. And I thought, well, maybe this would be a fit for us. So they came and they did a survey of our property, and they told me a couple of sites where this would work, and we decided to go ahead and do it. And so we're treating 78 acres of land with this constructed wetland. It's 1.1 acre of wetland, and then there's 3.6 or 3.5 acres of pollinator habitat around it as a buffer. And my neighbor pattern tiled his field, so we have 3 water control structures. One of them is in his main, which flows through my field to the creek to drain, and the other is in my waterway that goes in the inlet of the wetland, and then there's another water control structure at the outlet by the creek.
Yeah, so the way these work is that the water flows in from the tile to the wetland. It seeps through the wetland, and then there's a secondary structure that allows that to go into the creek, and simply the wetland manages the water by keeping it in place for a longer period. Is it wet year-round?
Pretty much. It's designed to have about a maximum of 18 inches of water in it. I was there yesterday. There's 4 deep zones that are about 3 foot deep, and they all have water in them right now, and the bottom is just muddy.
Constructing the wetland is just one part of it. You also have to have the plants put in place to manage some of this flow, and they have to actually be put in place. How long has your wetland been there, and did the plants come as you expected?
It was constructed in 2018. They started putting the pollinator habitat in the fall of 2018. They came in the spring of 2019 and put plugs of water plants in the bottom of the wetland at that time, and it's completely filled in now. We're still having some issues with the pollinator habitat, but I think we're going to do a burn this fall and then reseed it in the fall, and that should take care of that, I think.
Finally, and I'll let each of you think of this for just a moment, but I'm going to start here. I want to know what it is that you haven't done or that you've heard about that you thought, maybe I should try that one. What's in your conservation list or wish list, and what would cause you to go ahead and move forward with it?
Well, right now, from what I've was talked about today, I'm thinking about maybe a saturated buffer. I have 2 filter strips that are border 5 Mile Creek, and I think that might be a possibility of something that we could do to help reduce the nitrate levels in the streams.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing of this little forum we did this morning. I was just thinking. I was trying to think in my head. I think we have a few places also that we could, existing tile next to a smaller size stream. I think we could make that work. The other thing is I've wanted for a few years to put in a wetland, and so I'd like to put one of those in also.
Contact the Illinois Land Improvement Contractors Association.
So I guess my thing is, I've been thinking about this, but more today, and I've actually talked to some of the people here that had tables set up. I'm kind of thinking about looking into putting in a constructed wetland. We've got a farm where we have a little area that has CRP around it, where it's actually it's called Indian Creek. It's where Indian Creek starts, which ends up flowing into the Spoon River, which ends up flowing into the Mississippi. So I think it looks like it might be a good spot where we could put in a constructed wetland there. So that's something I'm going to investigate further.
Okay, I said that was the final question, but I really do want to know, since all three of you have the idea that constructed wetlands are something you want and or have implemented, why? It just seems like a big cost, and I want to know what it is from your perspective, what it is that you want from it or why. And it might be economic, it may be something entirely different.
Well, I was raised thinking that we are stewards of our land and that we should do something to make it better when we're gone than it was while we were here. And so I'm thinking that is something that will benefit my grandkids down the future. In the future, is to have cleaner water, and it's nice to see the butterflies and the deer and the birds and everything have a place to live.
I guess my main reason is my wife and I like ducks, and it'd be fun to see what habitat we'd get to come to it.
Along the same lines, again, us being stewards of the land that we take care of, and I'm going to be the last generation in my family to farm our family farm. So it maybe isn't going to necessarily benefit any of my family members down the road, but it's going to more of a benefit to mankind in general. Clean water is important, and my time in being involved with Illinois Farm Bureau and nutrient loss reduction strategy and things like that, it's just another practice that we can do to try to help move that needle and take care of some of those things.
You've been listening to episode 66 of the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast, Edge of Field Considerations, A Farmer's Perspective. This program is a production of University of Illinois Extension in conjunction with Rachel Curry, Nicole Haverback, and Emma Eldridge. I'm Todd Gleason.